My father's lawyer slid the will across the black oak table, and Elena's name was already waiting for me. I did not look at her first. I looked at the paper, at the hard white line of it under the chandelier, at the thick cream stock my father had always favored for documents he wanted remembered. Around me, 6 veil captains stood in a loose half-circle, silent in that practiced way dangerous men go silent when they smell weakness in a room. For household security guards stayed near the doors, shoulders squared, eyes lowered. Nobody touched a glass. Nobody cleared a throat. The estate library held its breath with me. Then I saw it. Not buried in some legal footnote. Not tucked into a list of staff severance or household accounts. Elena Marlowe had been named cleanly, deliberately, in the body of the will itself. My fingers stopped on the page. My father had left me everything operational. The ports, the warehouses, the routing channels, the shell companies, the properties, the weight of an empire built in blood and polished into respectability. But one clause sat there like a blade laid flat across my palm. Elena was to remain at Vale House under my authority until all private directives attached to her appointment are lawfully completed. No explanation. No apology. No room to pretend it meant nothing. I raised my eyes then. Elena sat at the far end of the table in a plain black suit, hands folded once over a leather notebook she had carried for as long as I had known her. 29, composed, unreadable. She had worked as my father's personal secretary for 3 years and had moved through this house like a quiet mechanism nobody questioned because my father never tolerated questions. She did not fidget. She did not flinch. If her name appearing in the will had shaken her, she had buried it deeper than most men could bury fear. The lawyer kept reading, but the room had already changed shape. I heard only fragments after that. Trustees. Asset transfer. Custodial authority. Compliance. The language of power made legal enough to survive death. My father had always known how to turn a command into something that would outlive him. And then the final page came. There was a separate sealed addendum. It was not to be opened in front of the captains. It was to be given to me only after I formally accepted control of the estate and the syndicate. That was when the first crack appeared. One of the captains, Russo, shifted his weight and let out the kind of short laugh men use when they want to test whether disrespect will be punished. "A secretary in the will," he said. Vale left us a riddle. Nobody answered him. But nobody corrected him either. I signed. The pen felt heavier than steel. With that signature, the properties, the syndicate, the obligations, the enemies, the dead, all of it settled onto my name. I had expected the pressure. I had not expected Elena Marlowe to be written into it. The lawyer passed me the sealed addendum. My father's wax crest had been pressed into the fold. Dark red. Unbroken. Final. "Open it now," Russo said. "No," I said. "Just one word," and the room tightened. I stood, slid the document into the inner pocket of my jacket, and looked at every captain in turn until Russo dropped his stare first. My father had ruled with spectacle when he needed to. I had learned a different lesson from him. Silence can humiliate a man more cleanly than shouting ever will. If my father wanted 6 witnesses, I said, he would have written 6 names. The room went still. Elena gathered her notebook, but as she rose, I caught the smallest change in her expression, not fear, not surprise. Recognition, as if something had happened exactly when she knew it would. That look did more damage to my composure than Russo's insolence. It told me this was not an accident of estate law. It was a design. I dismissed the captains. I dismissed the guards. The study door closed with a padded, expensive hush, sealing out the scrape of chairs and the muttered pride of men who thought inheritance should move through blood and violence alone. Warm lamplight fell across my father's desk, catching on crystal, brass, and the black leather notebook Elena Marlowe still held against her ribs like a shield she had carried for years. Rain touched the long windows in a patient tap, and somewhere deeper in the estate, one of the 4 household security staff resumed a measured patrol, boots crossing marble with the discipline of a metronome. In that room, with my father dead less than 48 hours and his will still echoing in my skull, silence stopped feeling like peace. It felt like a witness. I did not invite Elena Marlowe to sit. "Close the second lock," I said. Elena Marlowe turned, slid the brass bolt into place, and faced me again without asking why. That alone sharpened my suspicion. Most people became nervous when they were sealed in with me. Elena Marlowe looked prepared. I moved around the desk slowly, not because I feared her, but because I wanted the full measure of what my father had trusted. 29. Personal secretary. Precise handwriting. Quiet shoes. Eyes that missed almost nothing. My captains had seen a woman named in a dead man's will and assumed weakness, scandal, leverage. I had seen something worse. Intention. You recognized that clause before the lawyer finished reading it. I said. Why? The question landed between us like a blade laid flat on velvet. Elena Marlowe did not rush to answer. Rain whispered against the glass. The old clock on the shelf pressed another second into the room. Because your father told me the day would come, Elena Marlowe said. Not told me why. Not denied it. Told me the day would come. Cold moved through my chest in a clean line. My father had hidden businesses, routes, judges, debts, and graves for men who had worked beside him for 20 years. Yet somehow Elena Marlowe had been given advance warning about a document that placed her name beside mine. That was not clerical convenience. That was private design. What else did he tell you? To wait until we were alone. The room went still again, but this time it was only the two of us hearing it. Elena Marlowe stepped to the desk and set down the notebook. From the inside pocket of its back cover, she withdrew a slim key taped beneath a folded sheet of stationery I recognized instantly. My father's cream stock. My father's ink. My father's brutal, elegant handwriting. He had hidden a message inside the one object no captain would ever think to search because none of them had ever believed secretarial work mattered. 3 months ago, Elena Marlowe said, your father told me if his will was ever read aloud before all 6 captains, I was to give this only to you. Not to the attorney. Not to the guards. Only to you, and only after everyone else was out. My pulse did not quicken. It narrowed. Did you read it? No. I believed that answer more than I wanted to. Not because trust had appeared, but because restraint this exact required discipline. And discipline, in my world, was never accidental. I took the letter but did not open it yet. If you're lying, Elena Marlowe, there isn't a place in this city where my reach ends. Elena Marlowe met my stare with a steadiness that would have looked like defiance on anyone else. On her, it looked like exhaustion that had already counted the cost. If I were lying, Elena Marlowe said, I would have left before the reading. That answer irritated me because it was intelligent, and intelligence inside my house was suddenly more dangerous than disloyalty. A traitor could be found. A hidden plan could still be moving long after the hand that made it was buried. I unfolded the page. The paper made a dry, deliberate sound in my hands, the kind that seemed louder in a dead man's office than gunfire did in a living room. My father's handwriting cut across the page in hard blue ink, sharp and disciplined even from the grave. There were no greetings, no sentiment, no wasted breath. Damien Vale, if this instruction is in your hands, then you have already done the one thing I expected of you. You doubted the room before you doubted the paper. I read the line twice. Across the desk, Elena Marlowe did not move. The lamp carved gold along one side of her face and left the other in shadow. She looked as if she had spent years standing beside doors that powerful men opened and closed without ever asking what she had heard. For the first time since the reading, I had the distinct feeling that my father was still directing the room through her silence. The next paragraph was shorter. Do not remove Elena Marlowe from this house, this business, or your confidence until you have obeyed the second instruction. If you dismiss her early, you will hand my enemies exactly what they need. A slow chill climbed under my collar. That sentence did what threats never had. It did not challenge my authority. It assumed I would use it badly. I lowered the page by an inch and studied Elena Marlowe again. You knew there was more. I knew there might be, she said. Might. My job was to safeguard what he left, not to open what was addressed to you. The answer was careful, but not weak. There was a difference. Weak people avoided the blade. Careful people knew exactly where it was. I kept reading. Behind the false back of the bottom left desk drawer is a brass key. Use it tonight. Go alone, except for Elena Marlowe. If any captain insists on joining you, mark him. If any guard reports your movement before you return, dismiss him tomorrow. The room seemed to narrow around that line. My father had just turned paranoia into a test with names attached to it. Not suspicion in theory, exposure in practice. Then came the final line on the page. Trust Elena Marlowe until the ledger is in your hands. After that, decide whether you deserve the truth. I folded the paper once, precise and flat, buying myself 1 second to keep my face empty. That was the first hidden instruction. Not money, not a code. A command that bound my next move to the one woman in the estate every ambitious fool had already underestimated. Open the drawer, I said. Elena Marlowe's gaze sharpened. You want me to? I want to see whether my father trained obedience into you or fear. For the first time, irritation touched her expression. Good. Irritation was honest. She stepped around the desk, knelt by the carved mahogany, and slid open the bottom left drawer. Stationery. Account ledgers. A silver letter opener. Nothing else. Her fingers moved to the back panel, pressed once, then again, until a hidden seam gave with a soft wooden click. My father had built secrets into furniture like other men built them into banks. Inside rested a brass key no longer than my thumb, darkened with age and polished bright at the teeth. Elena Marlowe looked up at me, her hand hovering, waiting for permission she did not actually need. Take it, I said. When she placed it in my palm, the metal was warm from her skin. A tiny engraving flashed near the bow of the key. V3. Not sentimental. Indexed. I crossed to the office door and opened it. The hallway outside smelled faintly of cigar smoke and floor polish. 2 of the household security staff stood at the far end, pretending not to watch this wing too closely. Beyond them, voices from the lower hall rose and fell. Some from the 6 captains, restless already, measuring the hours after a patriarch's death, like gamblers counting cards. Listen carefully, I said to the guards. No one enters this office. The 2 guards straightened at once, their shoulders pulling tight beneath black jackets that suddenly looked too thin for the weight of the order. A grandfather clock somewhere below marked the quarter hour with a muted brass chime, and under it I could hear the house breathing wrong. Too many footsteps, too many whispers, too much hunger moving through polished hallways before the body of the old man was even cold in the family chapel. I held the office door half open, feeling the hidden instruction folded inside my inner pocket like a second pulse. My father had not asked for silence around his death. He had demanded control after it. No one enters this office, I repeated. Not a captain, not a lawyer, not staff. No one unless I bring them myself. Both household security staff nodded. One of them, the taller guard with a scar near his jaw, answered first. Understood. I should have shut the door and gone back to the desk. Instead, I looked past them and saw movement in the lower hall, a slow drift of dark suits beneath the chandelier, the 6 captains arranging themselves in small pairs and broken angles, never still, never innocent. Men like that did not pace when they were grieving. They paced when they were counting leverage. Then I saw Elena Marlowe. She stood near the console table beneath the portrait of my grandfather, a leather document case against her side, her posture disciplined but not relaxed. She was speaking to one of the household security staff posted by the staircase. From where I stood, I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. 2 of the captains had already turned toward her with the kind of interest that meant trouble. I closed the office door behind me and walked toward the stairs. The marble held the chill of evening through the soles of my shoes. By the time I reached the lower hall, the room had changed shape around her. It always did around weakness, or what men mistook for weakness. 3 captains had drifted closer, then a 4th. They formed no circle anyone could accuse, but the pressure was there all the same. Small smiles, lowered voices, bodies placed half an inch too close. Elena Marlowe kept her chin level. Her fingers did not fidget on the handle of the case. That steadiness, more than fear, seemed to irritate them. One captain gave a short laugh. Funny place for office staff to linger after a funeral reading. Another glanced at me, then back at her. Unless she's carrying something that belongs to the family. I am carrying records prepared for your late patriarch, Elena Marlowe said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. And I answered to the instructions left for this house. A dangerous answer. Not because it was rude, because it was true enough to provoke them. The oldest of the 6 captains stepped forward, silver at his temples, cruelty polished into manners. You answer to payroll, he said. Don't confuse proximity with rank. The line landed exactly how he wanted. A few nearby men smiled. One of the household security staff looked away. Public humiliation was one thing these rooms had always handled efficiently. No blood, no fingerprints, just a person reduced in front of witnesses until everyone learned where the floor was. Elena Marlowe did not move. That stillness told me more than panic would have. I stopped 10 feet away and said nothing at first. Sometimes silence stripped a room faster than shouting. One by one, the captains noticed me. Their expressions changed, but not enough. Not remorse. Calculation. They were testing not just her place, but mine. If I let them corner the dead man's secretary on the first night, then every sealed instruction, every page, every doubt my father had planted would belong to them by morning. The silver-haired captain inclined his head by a fraction. We were only asking what authority she thinks she has. I looked at Elena Marlowe before I answered. There was no plea in her face, only restraint. That made the insult uglier. The library lights threw a low amber sheen across the cut crystal decanters, turning the room warm while everything inside it went colder by the second. I let the silence hold just long enough for the 6 captains to understand that I had heard the insult beneath the question. Behind them, 2 of the household security staff remained at the doorway, hands clasped in front, careful not to choose a side with their faces. Elena Marlowe stood near my father's desk with a sealed leather folio pressed against her ribs, still as if stillness itself were armor. I had seen fear countless times. What stood in her eyes now was not fear. It was calculation under discipline, and that changed the temperature of the room. No one questions her authority tonight except me. The silver-haired captain lowered his gaze first, but not from obedience. From memory. He knew my father had ruled this house by making men regret small misreadings more than open betrayal. One by one, the others stepped back from the desk. Not far, just far enough to pretend respect while preserving appetite. That was how rot survived in powerful houses. Never by open force at first, but by testing what could be touched without consequence. I crossed to the desk, set my hand on the blotter, and looked at Elena. You said there was more. There is, I said to the room before she could answer. Leave us. No one moved. Then I turned my head, and that was enough. Chairs whispered against the Persian rug. Jacket sleeves brushed wood. The 4 guards cleared the threshold last, closing the double doors with a soft click that sounded too gentle for how much danger remained on the other side of it. When we were alone, the library seemed to exhale. Firelight slid over the glass-fronted bookcases, over my father's old bronze letter opener, over the dustless order he had imposed on every object he had ever owned. Even dead, he had arranged the room like a trap. Elena set the folio on the desk and did not sit. My father told you to wait until there were no witnesses, I said. Yes. The answer landed too quickly to be invented. I broke the wax seal. Inside lay a single typed page, one envelope addressed in my father's hand, and a photograph so old the corners had turned white. The image stopped me before the letter did. My father was younger by at least 20 years, standing on the stone steps of a church I did not recognize. Beside him stood a black woman in a dark coat, proud back despite the cheap fabric, one hand on the shoulder of a little girl of about 7. The girl's chin was lifted at the camera with stubborn dignity. I knew that face, not because I had ever seen the photograph, because the child was Elena Marlowe. The room went silent in a new way then, as if the house itself had leaned closer. I looked up. Why do you have this? I didn't, she said quietly. Your father did. I opened the envelope. My father's handwriting had always been severe, every line a command, even on paper. But the first sentence was not a command. It was a confession. If Damien is reading this with you in the room, then he has done one thing right. He chose not to let the house devour you before dawn. A bitter laugh almost left me, but it died before it reached my throat. Typical. Dead less than a day, and still judging me in real time. I kept reading. 22 years earlier, one of the men who helped build the Vale Empire had stolen cash, diverted shipments, and arranged a fire in a row house to erase a witness. My father had discovered the theft too late to stop the fire. A woman died in it. The child survived. My father never named sentiment as weakness in public, but private guilt, I was learning, had its own discipline. My father had discovered the theft too late to stop the fire. A woman died in it. The child survived. I stood at the end of the library table with the will open beneath my hand and felt something far more dangerous than anger begin to sharpen inside me. Anger was simple. This was not. This was design. I turned the page. There was a second sealed sheet folded into the back of the file, thinner than the others, almost hidden in the binding, as if my father had wanted it missed by everyone except the person stubborn enough to keep reading after midnight. The paper crackled when I opened it. His handwriting cut across the page in the same hard slant that had signed deaths, contracts, and campaign donations for 3 decades. If Elena Marlowe is still in my employ when this is read, she was hired for a reason no one in this house was told. I read that line twice. The room seemed to shrink around me. The amber light no longer felt warm. It felt surgical. I looked toward the dark window and saw my own reflection staring back like a witness who had arrived too late. My father had never believed in administrative charity. He did not keep people close because he liked them. Every chair near his desk had been purchased with usefulness, loyalty, leverage, or fear. Elena Marlowe had entered this estate 18 months ago with a clean resume, perfect timing, and a manner so controlled that most men mistook it for softness. I had accepted the explanation given to me because I had not bothered to question it. That failure was mine. I kept reading. The child who survived the fire was placed under another name through a church contact 2 counties south. I spent years confirming the line. Elena Marlowe is that child. I stopped breathing for a beat. Then I read it again, slower this time, because my mind rejected the sentence before it accepted it. The secretary who had organized my father's medications, managed his calls, corrected his books, and stood through insult with that infuriating calm had not been chosen by accident. She had been placed at the center of this house by the very man whose empire had been built over the ashes that made her an orphan. Not as a reward, not as a clerk, as restitution. My hand tightened on the page until the edge bit into my palm. I remembered every moment I had dismissed her presence as procedural. Every time I had seen her absorb contempt from the captains and thought restraint was simply part of her job. My father had known exactly what he was doing. He had brought the surviving child into the house, educated her, paid her, protected her proximity, and said nothing to me. Because he had not trusted me to deserve the truth. I heard the door open behind me, light and careful, and I knew who it was before I turned. Elena Marlowe always entered a room as if she had measured its temperature before crossing the threshold. I saw the archive drawer unlocked, she said. I assumed you were still reading. I faced her with the letter in my hand. For the first time since the funeral, I did not study her as an employee. I studied the cost of my father's silence. She wore the same dark dress from the day, her posture straight, her face unreadable except at the eyes. Those eyes were steady, too steady. You knew, I said. She did not flinch. Yes. The single word landed harder than denial would have. I took a step closer. How long? Since before I was hired. The truth changed shape again. Not hidden from her. Hidden with her. I felt heat rise through my chest, but it was not rage at her. It was the sick realization that every room in this estate had been arranged around a secret I had mistaken for obedience. Then why stay? I asked. Why work for the family that destroyed yours? Her gaze never dropped. Because your father asked what money could never repair. He said if I wanted the truth preserved, I had to stand close enough to see who deserved to inherit more than power. That silenced me. My father had not hired Elena Marlowe to balance his calendar. He had hired her to judge me. The insult from the captains, the hidden instruction, the name in the will, none of it had been sentimental after all. It had been a test with a living witness. I looked down at the letter one last time and found the final line, written smaller than the rest. If she leaves this house in fear, then my son is not fit to keep it. When I raised my eyes, Elena Marlowe was watching me with the calm of someone who had already survived the worst thing a powerful man could do. But the question pressing against the room was no longer what my father had done. It was who else knew, and what they would do now that I did. The silence after that line did not feel like grief anymore. It felt engineered. The study, with its dark walnut shelves and the low amber light from my father's desk lamp, seemed to contract around a single fact. Somebody had expected this moment, prepared for it, and stayed quiet long enough to profit from my confusion. A soft click came from the hallway. Not a footstep. A latch. I did not look toward the door right away. Years in my world had taught me that panic moved faster than bullets and usually killed more efficiently. Instead, I folded the letter once, slid it inside my jacket, and watched the reflection in the glass cabinet across from me. In that warped pane, I saw one of the household security staff pause outside the study as if waiting for instruction. Then another shape crossed behind him. Not one of mine. Elena Marlowe saw it too. Her posture changed by less than an inch, but that inch told me everything. She was no longer bracing for my judgment. She was bracing for an attack she had feared would come the moment I believed her. "Don't open that door," she said. One sentence. Flat. Certain. The room went still around it. That was answer enough to the question my father's letter had left hanging. Someone else knew. More than that, someone had been watching whether I would choose blood loyalty over truth. I moved to the side of the doorway instead of toward it and killed the lamp, letting the study fall into a colder wash of moonlight from the tall windows. In the dark, old silver frames and cut glass decanters gave off thin knives of reflection. I heard the handle test once, then twice. "Who?" I asked quietly. Elena Marlowe's gaze stayed on the door. "One of the 6 captains has been feeding the others pieces of the will for weeks. Not the whole thing. Just enough to make them afraid of what else your father left behind." That changed the shape of the danger immediately. This was no longer about buried guilt or private confession. This was internal war, political, calculated, and already in motion before I ever opened the envelope. I drew my gun. A key turned. The door opened 3 inches and stopped against the brass security bar I had thrown without thinking the moment we entered. Through that narrow crack came a familiar voice, smooth with false concern. "Damien Vale, one of the Vale Syndicate captains, said, 'The household is unsettled. Open the door. We need to discuss the secretary.'" So that was the trap. Not to kill Elena Marlowe in secret. To force me, publicly and quickly, to hand her over. If I refused, I would look compromised. If I agreed, I would confirm my father had trusted her with something dangerous enough to bury. Elena Marlowe reached into the leather folio she had kept at her side all evening. For the first time since I had known her, she moved before I did. From inside the folio, she pulled a small cassette recorder. Old, rectangular, black plastic worn smooth at the corners. "I found this where your father told me to look if he died suddenly," she said. "I was waiting to know whether you were him or his son." Then she pressed play. Static hissed first. Then my father's voice filled the study, thin with age but unmistakable in its authority. "If this recording is being heard, then someone in my house has moved too early." Outside the door, silence. On the tape, paper rustled. My father continued with the dreadful calm of a man setting a snare after death. "The 6 captains will claim they act to protect the family. They are lying. At least 3 of them have been diverting money through shell freight accounts tied to the fire that killed Elena Marlowe's mother. One among the household security staff has already been paid to remove documents if my son turns suspicious. Lock the study door. Listen carefully to who asks for the girl first." The blood in my body seemed to turn to iron. Steel seemed to settle under my skin where blood should have been. My father's study, with its dark walnut shelves and the low amber glow of 2 shaded lamps, no longer felt like a room built for mourning. It felt like a chamber designed for selection. My hand moved before thought did. I turned the key in the lock, slid the second brass latch into place, and watched Elena Marlowe understand exactly why. The first knock came less than 10 seconds later. Not loud. Careful. Then a voice through the door. "Damien Vale, open up." One of the 6 captains. I knew the weight of each man's voice the way other sons knew lullabies. This one was Victor Sorn, patient by habit, greedy by instinct, dangerous because he preferred calm over spectacle. I looked at Elena Marlowe. She did not step back. She did not tremble. She simply lowered her eyes to the will, then to the burned-edged freight ledger we had pulled from the hidden panel behind my father's desk. That was when I understood the trap was not meant to catch me with a gun in my hand. It was meant to catch men in a hurry. "Ask him what he wants," Elena Marlowe said quietly. Her voice did not command, but it cut through the room cleaner than mine would have. I walked to the door without unlocking it and spoke through the wood. "What do you need?" A pause. Then, "The secretary. She should be moved somewhere safe." There it was. Clean. Immediate. Not concerned for the will. Not concerned for me. Not concerned for the family. The first request was for Elena Marlowe. I closed my eyes for half a beat. My father had not written a warning. He had left a test. "Noted," I said. I stepped away from the door and looked at Elena Marlowe again. Her face remained composed, but something deeper moved behind her eyes now. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. She had expected this day longer than I had known it existed. Another knock followed, this one harder. Then another voice joined the first. Two captains now. Outside. The hallway began to fill with the soft, shifting sound of polished shoes and restrained impatience. Beyond them, I caught the lower murmur of household security staff taking positions, waiting to see who the estate belonged to before deciding who they served. The war had begun, and not a shot had been fired. "Can you prove the freight accounts connect to the fire?" I asked. Elena Marlowe reached into the desk drawer and removed 3 sealed envelopes bound with black thread. "Your father separated the evidence," she said. "Names in one, transfers in another, insurance signatures in the third. He said if they ever stood together in one room, the men tied to them would show themselves." A bitter laugh almost escaped me. Even dead, my father was still arranging seating charts for betrayal. The captains outside stopped pretending patience. A fist struck the door. Someone ordered the household security staff to get a key. That was the mistake I had been waiting for, because keys to this room existed in only 2 places: on my father's ring, which sat in my pocket, and in the basement lockbox controlled by estate protocol. If a guard produced one quickly, I would know which of the 4 had already been bought. "Open this door now," Victor Sorn called out. "For the good of the family." "No," Elena Marlowe said. The word was soft. "Absolute." I turned toward her. For the first time since the reading, she moved not like a secretary preserving documents, but like someone stepping into ground she had been told one day would be hers to defend. She crossed to the intercom panel by the fireplace and pressed the estate-wide channel my father reserved for internal emergencies. Then she spoke to the entire house. "The study is sealed under the patriarch's final instruction," Elena Marlowe said. "Any captain or member of household security staff attempting forced entry will be recorded as acting against the will." Silence hit the hallway like cold water. Silence hit the hallway like cold water. I stood in the center of my father's study with the ash of burned paper still clinging to the air, and for the first time since his death, I understood that the war over his estate had never been only about money, territory, or rank. The 6 Vale Syndicate captains were outside that door. The 4 members of the household security staff were somewhere beyond them, waiting to see who would own the next hour. But inside that room, with the fire hissing low in the marble hearth and my father's voice still echoing from the recorder Elena Marlowe had protected at the cost of everything, the truth became smaller, sharper, and far more dangerous. It had my name in it, and hers. I turned back to the final page we had pulled from the hidden compartment behind the portrait frame, the one my father had sealed separately from the rest of the will. His handwriting was steady, old-fashioned, almost severe. No trembling lines. No confusion. He had known exactly what storm he was leaving behind. "Elena," I said, and even to my own ears my voice sounded unfamiliar, stripped clean of command. "Read it again." She didn't move at first. Smoke had brushed a gray shadow across one sleeve of her blouse. There was blood at her cuff from where splintered wood had cut her hand during the struggle in the hallway. She looked exhausted, but not afraid. Her eyes stayed on the page. Then she read, "If Damien Vale is to inherit my seat," she said quietly, "he must first understand why Elena Marlowe stands named in this will. She was not hired to serve my office. She was hired to judge my son when I no longer could." The room went still in a way gunfire could never accomplish. I felt the words land harder than any threat from a rival family. "Judge my son. Not spy on me. Not betray me. Judge me." Elena lowered the page and looked at me directly. No triumph. No apology. Only the kind of honesty that does not bother dressing itself in comfort. My father's recording had already explained the rest, but hearing this sentence in writing gave it a final weight. Years earlier, after one of my bloodier consolidations, my father had begun to fear that I had become efficient enough to mistake cruelty for strength. He had hired Elena Marlowe because she had done the one thing no captain, no lawyer, and no paid loyalist had ever dared to do in front of him: refuse a powerful man without trembling. She had once walked out of a meeting rather than alter records that would destroy an innocent family tied to one of our businesses. My father saw in her what he no longer trusted in his own house: a moral witness. A line in the dark. And then came the part that changed everything. I took the page from her and read the final clause myself. Elena Marlowe is named in this will as co-holder of release authority over the Vale inheritance ledger. Without her signed declaration that Damien Vale has chosen preservation over predation, no transfer of the protected accounts, properties, or contingency trusts is to be completed. Not beneficiary, not thief, not hidden heir, gatekeeper. That was why her name had been there. That was why she had really been hired. Not to take my father's empire from me, to decide whether I was fit to touch what he built. Behind the sealed doors, a captain pounded once with the flat of his hand. Then another voice rose, demanding entry, demanding answers, demanding proof that Elena had manipulated me. They were still thinking in the old language of force, of signatures stolen at gunpoint, of pressure and fear. They still believed power could be taken faster than it could be earned. I looked at Elena Marlowe, and for the first time since I had known her, I understood the loneliness of the position my father had forced on her.